Windswept Chapter 2.
John.
Morning came after a long dream. I always had dreams in color. I didn't always remember all of it, but when the dream came just before dawn, clear and vivid, I recalled the whole thing. I never forgot the dream that came to me one April dawn and again last night. I could feel the warmth of a glowing hearth in winter as family members sat there. My grandparents and Uncle Jim, all dead for several years. I must admit, it was kind of an eerie specter. My father did all the talking. I could see him speak, but couldn't hear exactly what he said, although the rest of the bygone family seemed to hear and apparently understand his every word. I desperately wanted to ask him something, but didn't even know what there was to know. It was as though all my life I had been left out of some dark eternal secret that eluded my thoughts and emotions.
My clouded mind desperately grabbed at the vision so that I could hear what Pa said. What did everyone know that I didn't? Then all at once, with a yawn, I was wide awake. Some say dreams are visions. I think they are emotions or something you just can't quite understand that turn themselves into dreams. The day started like so many others. I slowly arose from my rumpled bed, the thinning fog of the dream fading from my mind. I moved on with my morning routine. Slipping off a cotton nightshirt, I put on a clean, fresh button-down work shirt and a pair of faded denim overalls, socks and boots, and a red cotton handkerchief I always stuffed in my back pocket. It wasn't until I was standing in front of the bedroom mirror combing my hair, I realized it was, at last, the 4th of July. Although it was still a regular workday, I perked up and headed toward the kitchen. I gave Mother in her white apron and oven mitts a peck on the cheek.
Morning, Ma.
She smiled as she pulled a flat of hot muffins out of the oven. Already the kitchen was alive with noises and flavors hanging in the air. Metal pots banged, water splashed, and cupboard doors opened then shut again before you could blink. Mother was amazing in the kitchen. She kept everything going, like that, all at once. "I want you to have a good breakfast this morning," she ordered. "Your father had his coffee and he's already in the Southfield." She fixed me a plate piled high with food and said, "Here, sit down and eat before you go out there." I sat, stuck a cloth under my chin, and dug into the fried eggs and sourdough flapjacks served with a cold glass of milk. "Thanks, Mom," I said, as I wolfed down the last piece of toast. Among the clutter of pans and dishes was a wooden pastry board and rolling pin where she started working a large ball of dough for pies. At the same time, the wonderful aroma of baking apples and cinnamon filled my nose. "You know I love your famous apple pie." I pinched a piece of raw dough when she wasn't looking. "You're the best cook in town." I saw another flat pan containing a couple of our hens, plucked, cleaned, and ready for stuffing. Chickens ran around the barn, and we had a hatchet and a tree stump that was used to do them in. There wasn't a much better taste than a homegrown baked chicken. My mouth watered thinking about that evening meal. "I'd better get out there. Pa'll be looking for me." I gulped down the last of my milk and rushed out the back door. Morning light was beginning to brush away dark from the fields. Mid-afternoon, we headed back to the farm. My job was to hitch up the wagon and feed the horse. I grew up in that big red barn. As a kid, I spent many a rainy day with my pal, Tom Cooper, playing in there. We built a fort out of hay bales and played cowboy shootout. We roughhoused up in the loft for hours, fighting off wild Indian attacks. Newborn ponies were born there in the spring, and I cleaned out the stalls regularly. Buck, our Morgan horse, stood in his favorite spot under an old gnarled oak. "Hello, boy," I called, giving him a pat on the neck. He swayed his big brown head and snorted back. I clipped on a bag of oats, walked over to the tack room, and picked out the bridle and harness, all oiled and polished. Climbing up to the loft, I forked a full load of straw down to the farm wagon parked in the barn. A short time later, the horse and wagon waited in front of the house. The squeak of an unoiled hinge holding the front screen door caught my attention. Mother came out with an oversized picnic basket packed with baked chicken and apple pies. We had a metal canister filled to the top with chunks of ice and freezing cold lemonade already sitting on the porch. She set down the basket and stood there for a moment, still wrapped in that white cotton apron. A northern breeze gently cooled her reddened face as she observed a high cloud and surveyed the endless blue skies. "Another hot day." She turned to me and ordered, Go ahead and get these things on the wagon, and be careful. There's glasses inside. Yes, ma'am. I did that and went inside to wash up. Minutes later, I was lying deep in the hay, way in the back. We'll be meeting at the Morgan's Ranch, Pa mentioned as he climbed on board. Get up, he hollered and snapped the reins. We were off on our way to the picnic and the carnival and the fireworks at long last. Half a mile down the dusty road was Scott's Crossing, then a mile over to the Morgan's Ranch. They could see us coming. We pulled in the yard with dogs barking and the younger kids running around playing tag. Father pulled back on the reins and called out to Ted Morgan. Good afternoon, Mr. Morgan. Sarah? Tipping his Irish bowler, Ted replied, Afternoon back, Mr. O'Leary and Mary. After the greetings were finished, Ted helped Ma down from the wagon, and the ladies went inside for more picnic baskets. The Morgans were the most delightful family you would ever meet. Mother and Mrs. Morgan were always doing something together for the church, and Ted had become Pa's best friend. I was kicked back in the hay, a piece of straw hanging out of my mouth, when I heard a rather sweet voice. Aren't you going to help me up on that wagon, Johnny O'Leary? Questioned Amy. Amy Morgan had changed. I hadn't seen her in a few months and never knew a girl could grow up so fast. She had it all, everything a strapping young man could ask for, and sparkling blue eyes to boot. She was the sweetest girl I ever saw. At the sight of her, my eyes grew wide, and the straw fell right out of my mouth. I jumped down off the sideboard. Amy, haven't seen you in a while. Oh, I've been around, employing that coy look girls give when flirting. It's been awful hot this summer. She smiled. My face turned red, and I almost melted. Yeah, it's hot. It's been warm, all right. The folks were coming out of the house with more picnic baskets. Mother called out, I said, Johnny, come help with all this stuff, please. Sorry, Ma, didn't hear you. I ran up to the porch and grabbed as many bundles as I could carry with Amy following right behind me. After we loaded on more baked chicken, potatoes, and pies, along with little Bobby, Sandy, and Anna, we headed toward Miller's Flat. Amy's folks rode comfortably in their own surrey with several excited farm dogs running around, barking at everything along the way. Amy Morgan and I sat in the straw and talked about the hot summer. As the wooden wheels turned on the way up to Miller's, it seemed at that moment everything was as it should have been. Yellow and pale blue summer flowers tinted the dry fields all around, and prairie chickens squabbled in the distance. The road turned upward, winding gradually to the top of the ridge. Amy nudged over. Look at this! She had a white butterfly in her hand. Isn't it beautiful? We watched as a light breeze fluttered its delicate wings. One of the large wagon wheels bumped into a rut, jolting Amy even closer. Snapping the whip overhead with a crack, Pa called out, Let's go, Buck, get up. We held on. The butterfly flew. Are we going to make it? Amy asked, grabbing my arm. Sure, I said. Old Buck's got a lot of pull in him yet. You might want to hold on to me a bit longer, though. I sighed as she settled her hand around my arm. We could see people on top of the ridge waving flags and shouting out, Happy 4th of July! God bless America! Mother looked back at Amy and me and asked, You hear that? Can you hear the band? Faintly at first, just over the racket of the rolling undercarriage was the delightful thunder of drums and shrill horn, playing a John Philip Sousa march. That's the Denver Firehouse Brass Band, reported Mother. The place looked like a carnival. Red, white, and blue banners and flags had been hoisted up on poles. There were booths where ladies sold pies and sarsaparilla, and the tangy smell of cooking meat filled the air. I helped Amy off the high backboard, saying, Come on, Amy. We ran to gawk at the new automobiles driven from the city. I can't believe it, she said, while looking at the polished brass lamps and plush leather seats of different vehicles. I pulled Amy to the new fire truck. Now that's a sight, I marveled. Bet it goes maybe 20, 25 miles an hour. That fast? She challenged. Overhearing our talk, a big, heavy-set Irish fireman leaned over and boasted, May make 30 with a full tank of water. Amazed, Amy and I both laughed and ran off to see the brass band. Blasting out the stars and stripes to the beat of the drum and the crash of the cymbals sent shivers up my spine. I was proud at that moment. My father fought in the war and all. Amy! Johnny! Picnic's ready! Mother called out. Mother had picked out a swell spot overlooking the plains below. The whole assembly of families was doing the same, spread out on blankets on the side of the hill, with home-cooked chicken and pies waiting to be eaten. Reverend Scott appeared on the grandstand, and the crowd went quiet. "Well, here we are again for another glorious celebration," he said. "It says in the Bible that Jesus turned the water into wine. That will taste mighty good tonight. We're all hoping he'll soon return, as it's been a hot summer indeed. Let's not forget the true celebration is the resurrection." The preacher reached out his arms and signaled the multitudes to bow their heads. "We thank you, Lord Jesus, for this July 4th in the year of our Lord, 1922, and this wonderful land known as America. Thank you for our bounty and bless each family here. Amen. Let's eat." We all appreciated the Reverend giving grace, and with that, the boisterous din of talking resumed, and the band played a softer tune while we picnicked. "What a wonderful sunset," whispered Amy. Looking out over the plains below, the wheat fields had turned a shadowy gold from the last glow of sun setting, just behind the high Rockies to the west. The caps of those magnificent peaks were crowned with glowing cumulus embers. Amy clutched my hand, and we waited together while the fading sunset disappeared in front of us. A few moments later came the low pound of the cannon and the fiery, sparkling tail of the first rocket. All heads turned skyward in time to catch a dazzling explosion high above the ridge. "Ooh!" sighed the crowd. "Ah!" The blast of wondrous fireworks illuminated the night. Each time the cannon fired off, we looked into the night sky. As bright flashes lit the darkness, gray clouds of smoke slowly drifted away. "I like the crackly ones," Amy whispered in my ear. The cannon fired again, a low, deep, ground-shaking blast. A rocket, sounding like a train whistle, streaked upward into the night. Ka-boom! Brilliant, shimmering red and silver and yellow streamers pushed out in a huge circle that seemed to cover the entire sky. Pa turned around with a smile and uttered, "Now that's what it's all about." The fire show continued for what seemed like an extra long time. Then 100 or more Roman candles set off the grand finale. We watched the last fireball fizzle out, while the stars in our eyes faded and the rattle of automobile engines cranked and popped. People loaded the wagons with satisfied children and empty picnic baskets. Mother called out, "Come on, kids, time to go." She turned to the Johnsons. "Great fireworks this year." Ruth Johnson replied, "Wonderful. Have a safe ride home." Reverend Scott, still full of the gospel, called out to each family, "We'll see you in church this Sunday, special service." Finally ready, we headed back down the hill. Every person in that slow caravan of wooden hay wagons bellowed song after song with laughter as the lamplight flickered the way. Buck lumbered down the turnoff to the Morgan Ranch. Pa pulled on the leather reins and shoved the brake forward. "Okay, Buck, just a little way more now," he said. I wish the night would have lasted forever with beautiful Amy Morgan. We talked about all sorts of things on the way back. I never talked that long to a girl, except Mother, of course. Still snuggling in fresh hay, looking deep into her eyes, I said, "Well, here we are." "Uh-huh," she nodded, a small pout on her lips and sadness in her eyes. Bobby and Anna climbed off the back. I jumped down and helped Amy to the ground. As I lifted her, she kissed me on the cheek. "Wah! What was that for?" I stammered. She simply stated, "John O'Leary, you're the sweetest boy I've ever known." With that, she ran into the house. I jumped atop the hay with a leap. Pa was right. Amy was a fine girl, someday just right for an Irish farmer's wife. "Come up here, John," Pa ordered. "You can drive the rest of the way." Then he gave me that knowing look. "So, what are you grinning about, Johnny boy?" "Just grinning, you know." I stuck a piece of straw in my teeth and drove. My folks cuddled in the back as I finally walked Buck, more than ready, back to his stall. I hadn't noticed how worn out he'd become until then. I fixed him up with a fresh bag of oats and gave him a nice rub down. The hour was late, and there was work to be done the next day. We'd been to a glorious Independence Day celebration, but I wasn't thinking about the fireworks. I was thinking about, Amy Morgan, Windswept.
Chapter 3.
John, I'd worked alone on barbed wire fences all day. There had been light rain, clouds drifting in from the west that afternoon. Father had hitched Buck to the wagon and gone into town early to the Thompson sawmill for a load of new lumber. We'd planned to build a tack room on back of the barn. Near sunset, I headed to the house, expecting to give a hand unloading the wood after supper. Mother stood on the front porch looking down the road toward the mill. She seemed a little worried. "Your pa ain't back yet." Wiping her hands with a dish towel, she murmured, "Well, come on in for supper. He'll have to eat later." Partly because of the pointed absence of Father's usual kidding around and Mother's growing concern for his whereabouts, supper was quiet. Ma's voice quivered as she asked, "He should have been back by now, don't you think?" I wasn't all that concerned myself and tried to assure her. "A lot of things could have slowed him, Ma. Maybe they took a little longer at the mill." Filling the sink with water and dishes, she said, "With this rain coming in, I think you should walk down to the crossing and see if he's on his way." Not wanting to walk all the way to the main road, I quietly protested, "Oh, Ma, he'll be along any time now. Do I have to?" Mother sternly smiled like I was her lost child. She placed another cup in the cabinet as she gently said, "It's starting to sprinkle. I think it might rain." She dried our plates and then asked, "Could you go just see if maybe he lost a wheel or something?" Her mood was starting to worry me now. "All right, but when we get back, I'll take some of your hot chocolate," I reassuringly teased her. She thanked me as I slipped on my raincoat and boots. Stepping out onto the porch, I noticed it had gotten quite dark, and I felt the cold dampness in the air. Pulling my collar up for warmth, I muttered to myself, "Well, he'll probably be coming this way anyhow." I pushed my way toward the crossing as lighting illuminated dark clouds to the west. Then the rain began to fall and was swallowed up by the thirsty ground. When I passed the last fence line, the steady sound of my own footsteps was suppressed by rumbling thunder. Just before the main road, a gully forms a tight turn where the road switches back above a dry river bottom. In the dark down below, I saw something. Then I stepped on something hard. Lumber scattered all the way over and down into the darkness. My heart pounded rapidly. Things are going to be all right. He'll be fine. In a revealing blue flash of lightning, I saw the wagon. Stumbling down the hill, I frantically called out in the rain, "Pa! Pa, where are you?" But the shouts were all in vain. I was too late. The heavily loaded wagon had tumbled off the road, spewing lumber all the way down and burying my father under the load. My mind screamed, telling me I had to get him out. Grabbing whatever was in the way, I threw heavy boards off him like pencils, not feeling the weight. My tears flowed and mixed with the cold rain pouring over his body. Finally collapsing in the mud, I held my paw. In brief catches of blue light from the storm, our horse, Buck, lay flat on his side, still breathing. "He'll have to be put down." I sat there all night on the damp ground. The wagon was on its side, so I leaned some of the lumber up against it for shelter. I waited there till dawn, watching distant flashes of hot lightning move further away. My father's words kept coming back to me about taking care of Mother and making a life for myself. And I thought, with a girl like Amy Morgan, it could be a good life. That dream I'd had time and again finally made sense now. Pa knew what was coming. I remembered what he'd said. "In the fall, after we get the wheat stacked, we'll go up north fishing. It'll be cooler. We'll try the streams for browns. We can camp around the lakes at Fort Collins. Yep, we'll go in the fall." Then it all hit me like a tidal wave. There would be no fishing trip. The next few days were like a wretched dream. Mother in a long black dress, the sympathetic friends and churchgoers stopping by the farm, all repeating the same old phrases. "It's all up to you now, Johnny. Take care of your mother." And even though the task seemed daunting, I was ready and willing for the challenge. Besides, I was always going to be a farmer. That was all I ever wanted to be, other than some silly pipe dreams about seeing the world. Following tradition, the casket was kept in the home. Wreaths and tall white candles were carefully placed around the darkened parlor where Mother prayed and people stopped by to pay their respects. On Sunday, we all gathered for Father's funeral at the cemetery behind our church, the Good Shepherd Episcopal. Reverend Scott spoke in calm, comforting verses that drifted over our quiet repose like the soft clouds passing overhead. He had always liked my father, although Pa wasn't always interested in revivals. Ted Morgan, who had been one of Pa's closest friends, stepped forward and gave a eulogy. His voice quieted. He'll be remembered by his wife Mary and his son John. Some of us have known him for many years and will miss him. A tall man stood somewhat to the back of the small gathering, dressed in a long dark overcoat. Once I saw Mother glance over at him through her black veil. The service went on for about an hour. Mother carried her sorrow with the dignity of a good Christian wife, quiet and proud. When they all walked away, Ted and Sarah Morgan took us back to the ranch. Sarah, standing on the porch, gently held Mother's hand and asked, "Are you going to be all right, Mary? You know, anything you need." Mother looked up for a moment, acknowledging Sarah's genuine concern. "Well, send John if you need us. I'll stop in too." Sarah hugged Ma and kissed her cheek. With a sorrowful half smile, she kissed me on the forehead, saying, "I need to talk to you a moment." She wrapped her hand around my arm and led me toward their wagon. Before Mrs. Morgan could say anything more, I asked, "Where is Amy? I thought she would be here." She squeezed my bicep and said, "She wanted to be here, but I needed her to stay with the little ones. You come by and let her explain. Take care of your mother, John. We'll see you tomorrow." Sarah glanced at her husband and whispered, "We'd better go, Ted." As I watched their wagon traverse over the dusty road, I heard Mother's bedroom door close. I didn't see her again till the next evening, when she walked out to the porch in time to see the first stars shining through the darkening sky. "John, your father and I planned for you to take over this ranch when it was time," Ma said, her arms folded as she looked out at the first diamonds twinkling out from the heavens. Still dressed in black, she stood there. The silence between her words was as vast as the Midwestern sky. I finally spoke up. "Mom, you know everything is going to be okay. We'll do all right this year. This ranch is all we had. Your father and Uncle Jim built this place up from the prairie. In a couple of weeks, it'll be time to bring in the wheat. It'll be a fair harvest." She turned with a resolved look on her saddened face and sat in Father's wicker chair. "I've been thinking about things, and I've certainly prayed about it in the last few days. Johnny," she spoke again as she nodded, "the banker from Denver was at your Pia's funeral. We talked, and he offered a good price for the land." Those words hit me like a freight train. "What? You aren't going to do that, Mom?" I jumped off the porch, dismayed. "This is all I have ever done. I can do this, Mom. You know I can." In her soft way, she tried to comfort me. "I understand you have your heart in this place, son, just like your father did, but it'd be too much for any boy your age. Besides, it's already been decided." "But you didn't even ask me," I cried. Tears in her eyes, she said, "It's been decided, that's it." I yelled, "Just what am I supposed to do with my life then? What?" For the first time in my life, I really felt betrayed. This was the only home I ever knew. Anger had turned to sarcasm. "What should I do then, Ma? Be a ranch hand, or maybe work in the mill?" Angry and hurt, she shouted, "Don't you take that tone with me! Your father would take you to the woodshed." I went to her and held her close. "I'm sorry, Ma. I'm sorry." After a little while, she said, "Your Aunt Grace in Boston sent a telegram on Sunday. She's invited us to live with her, and I think that would be best." I calmed down a bit to accept the inevitable as best I could, because I didn't want to argue with her anymore. So I said, "That sounds fine, Mom, just fine." But living with Aunt Grace in Boston, I wasn't going to do that. All the dreams I'd had about having a ranch of my own and a life like my folks gone, up in smoke. I laid in bed wondering, lifted in a strange state with nothing to hold on to. In a way, that was the most exhilarating feeling I'd ever had. There was nothing to hold on to. The entire past was gone. All that was left was desire. I knew I had to find my own way, someplace, somewhere other than where I had been. I got up and began to move. There was a knapsack in my closet that, on quiet summer nights, I'd dreamt of taking to the far-off places I never thought I'd see. I filled it. A pocket knife, some extra socks, denim pants, and finally my grandfather's well-read and worn leather-bound Bible. To my mother, I wrote a brief note. "Mother, I know you're doing the best thing you can right now. Don't know where I'm going to end up, but I've got to find my own way. Don't worry, Johnny." When I stepped out on the porch for the last time, I looked to the stars. Which one would guide me? The way was set. by what I didn't want to know, but the next step would be east. Whispering to the wind, I recalled a prayer. Dear Father, light the way. I stepped off the porch and onto the dirt road that began my journey.